When she said those words, "Get out of my kitchen," now something in me shifted. Not snapped, not shattered all at once. It was slower than that. It's like porcelain cracking beneath years of invisible pressure. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from something colder, fury that had been sleeping for too long. I had held that same wooden spoon for over 30 years, stirred countless meals in the same pot, cooked for my husband, my son, my friends, my neighbors. That kitchen wasn't just a room, it was me. It was the last piece of my identity that still felt intact. And yet there she stood in my kitchen, wearing one of my aprons like a crown. Her hair tied perfectly, her tone sharp enough to slice through bone. Clara, my daughter-in-law. The woman my son once called the love of his life. When I didn't move fast enough, she planted her hands on her hips. "Eleanor," she said, drawing out my name like a reprimand, "you're hovering again. You're making me nervous. Please go sit down. I've got this." But that wasn't what she meant. She didn't want me sitting down. She wanted me gone. Before I could answer, Daniel walked in, my son, my only child. And instead of stopping her, instead of reminding her whose home this was, he did something I'll never forget. He started to clap, slow, sarcastic, mocking applause. And then with that smug grin he used to wear when he'd get away with something as a boy, he said, "That's my girl." Finally, someone's putting a little modern energy in this house. I stared at him. I wanted to speak, but no sound came. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It turned to dust. My son, my sweet, clumsy, gentle Daniel, was now clapping while his wife humiliated me in my own home. But before I tell you how we got here, before you understand the rage that was growing inside me like a storm, I could no longer contain. I need to go back. 'Cause stories like this never start with one cruel sentence. They start with love, with blind, foolish love. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'm 63 years old, and I have spent the last 5 years living like a ghost in my own house. After my husband Harold passed away, I told myself I'd done enough suffering for one lifetime. We'd had a simple but beautiful marriage, 41 years of partnership. Laughter, and the kind of silence that feels safe. When he died, I thought my heart would never heal. But I had Daniel, my pride, my reason to keep going. He was 32 when he met Clara, confident, witty, full of ideas, just like his father. When he brought her home for dinner the first time, I remember thinking, finally, he's found someone who matches him. She was beautiful, the kind of woman who turns heads without trying. I could tell she knew it too. Every gesture, every word seemed rehearsed, polished. She had an aura of entitlement even then, though I mistook it for confidence. I wanted to like her. I really did. But from the first moment she shook my hand, something in her eyes told me I was being evaluated, weighed, found lacking. Still, I bit my tongue, because mothers do that, don't they? We swallow discomfort for the sake of our children's happiness. At dinner, she laughed at all of Daniel's stories louder than necessary, her hand always on his arm. When she spoke to me, it was with a polite, practiced sweetness that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. But Daniel was glowing, and that was enough. I told myself, give her time. She's young. She's softened. How naive I was. The wedding was a spectacle. White roses, champagne fountains, a string quartet. I contributed nearly $20,000. Though if you'd asked anyone there, they'd have sworn Clara's parents paid for everything. I didn't protest. It wasn't my day after all. Still, I'll never forget sitting at that table tucked in the back corner of the reception hall, next to distant cousins and Harold's old bowling buddies. Watching my son dance with his bride under glittering chandeliers while I smiled through tears. I told myself they were tears of joy. But deep down, I knew they weren't. When I went back to my hotel room that night, I cried until dawn. They lasted 8 months in their apartment before Daniel showed up on my doorstep, suitcase in hand, and that same sheepish grin. "Mom," he said, "it's just temporary. We're in between places. Clara's looking for a better job, and my promotion's coming soon. Just a couple of months, okay? I had 3 bedrooms. Too much space for one woman? Okay? And I loved my son. So, of course, I said yes. This will always be your home, I told him. If only I'd known temporary would turn into 5 long years. At first, I told myself it would be fine. Clara worked at a boutique downtown, Daniel at his tech firm. I still had my quiet mornings, my garden, my kitchen. But slowly, things began to shift. Little comments here and there. Tiny abrasions on my dignity that I brushed off at first. Eleanor, she'd say, could you add my delicates to your laundry? I'm swamped with work. Eleanor, your sauce is a bit heavy. Kay can show you a lighter recipe. Eleanor, maybe it's time we updated this furniture. It feels dated. Each remark came with a smile. It's that perfectly polished smile that never reached her eyes. And Daniel, he never said a word. He'd just glance up from his laptop, murmur, "She means well, Mom," and go back to typing. It's the respect I'd earned over decades. The quiet authority of being the woman who built this home began to erode, grain by grain, till one day it was gone. 6 months in, Clara quit her job. I'm burned out, she said, lounging on my sofa in silk pajamas. I need time to reset. That reset has now lasted 4.5 years. 4.5 years of me cooking her meals, washing her clothes, and cleaning around her while she scrolled endlessly on her phone. And Daniel, my sweet Daniel. He enabled it all. Mom, she's finding herself, he'd say. She's been under so much stress. The word became their excuse for everything. I became invisible in my own home. My suggestions were dismissed. My space invaded. My silence taken as permission. Till that day in the kitchen. It was a Saturday morning, Clara's birthday. The air smelled of rain and cinnamon toast. I was sitting quietly, enjoying my coffee, when the front door burst open. Clara and her mother, Beatrice, stormed in like they owned the place, arms full of grocery bags, perfume filling every corner of my house. Today, Clara declared, I'm going to show everyone who the real chef in this family is. Beatrice laughed, her voice syrupy and cruel. That's my girl. You've always had the touch. Unlike some people, her eyes flicked toward me, full of disdain. Said nothing. Just sipped my coffee and pretended not to hear. They began pulling out my spices, my pans, my heirloom utensils, things I'd collected over decades. Beatrice opened my refrigerator without asking, rearranging everything. I finally spoke softly. Excuse me, Clara, cut me off. Eleanor, it's my birthday. I'd like to cook for my family. Do us a favor. She pointed toward the door. Give us space. Her tone wasn't a request, it was a command. That's when it happened. Those words I'll never forget. Get out of my kitchen. Now. Her kitchen, my house, my life. And Daniel walked in just in time to clap for her. Pause, long silence. That was the moment I realized I wasn't living with my son anymore. I was serving him, serving them, and something deep inside me, something I had buried under years of politeness and patience, began to stir. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of their reckoning, and the end of the woman they thought they could control. I wish I could say that was the worst of it. That being thrown out of my own kitchen was the deepest cut. But the universe has a way of showing you just how much pain you can hold before you break. And that day, Clara's birthday, was only the beginning of my breaking. After she threw me out, I went upstairs. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my mug. From my room, I could hear them downstairs laughing, clattering pots, the sharp scrape of my knives against my wooden cutting board. Every sound was like a taunt. The kitchen that had always been my sanctuary now sounded like a battlefield I'd lost. 2 hours later, the house filled with people. Clara's family came first. Her parents, her sisters, their husbands, loud, confident voices, expensive perfume, and a kind of arrogance that didn't bother to hide itself. Then came her friends, all of them glossy and loud, filling my living room with laughter that felt like static in my ears. I stayed upstairs for as long as I could. But then I heard Daniel's footsteps on the stairs. He didn't knock. He never does. He just opened the door. Mom, he said, why are you hiding up here? Come down. It's Clara's party. I looked at him. Son? My boy who used to beg me for another story before bed, who'd sit at the table with his homework while I cooked dinner. I searched his face for a trace of that boy. But all I saw was impatience. Daniel, I said quietly, she threw me out of my own kitchen. He sighed that long, tired sigh that people use when they don't want to deal with you. Mom, please don't make this a big thing. It's her birthday. Let her have this. She's under a lot of stress lately. I stared at him, and I'm not. He didn't answer. He just gave me that pleading look, the same one he used as a teenager whenever he wanted something he knew I disapproved of. Please, he said, don't start anything tonight. And, like a fool, I nodded. All right, Daniel, I won't. I put on my lavender dress, the one Harold always said made my eyes look softer, and went downstairs. The living room was bright, almost too bright. Balloons everywhere, music playing, laughter echoing off the walls that used to carry my husband's voice. Clara stood in the center, radiant, confident, a glass of wine in her hand. Daniel beside her, his arm around her waist, grinning. My son, my flesh and blood. And not one person in that room even noticed me walk in. No one said hello. No one asked if I wanted a drink. I was a ghost, drifting between them all, unseen. When Clara saw me, she didn't smile. She raised her glass slightly and said, Eleanor, we've just started dinner. Come on in. Her tone was polite, but her eyes said, don't ruin this. The dining room table was laid out beautifully. I'll give her that. My tablecloth, my crystal glasses, my silverware polished to a shine. The smell of roasted meat and garlic filled the room, the scent of my recipes. I hovered by the doorway as everyone found their seats. There were 12 chairs, 12. And when I counted, there wasn't one left for me. Robert, her father, looked up and smirked. Looks like we're one seat short. Eleanor, why don't you eat in the kitchen? You spend enough time in there anyway? The laughter that followed, I can still hear it. That shallow, cruel kind of laughter people use to remind you that you don't belong. I felt the heat rise up my neck. Face was burning. Daniel looked around the table. He saw it. He saw everything. And do you know what he did? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I turned away before the tears could fall. My throat was tight, my chest aching. I just needed to get away. But as I reached the hallway, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. It was a message from Arthur, my accountant and the oldest friend I have left in this world. Eleanor, urgent. Call me immediately. It's about Daniel. I slipped into the laundry room, away from the noise, and called him. My hands were shaking. Arthur, what's wrong? His voice came through low, serious. Eleanor, I didn't want to alarm you until I confirmed. But Daniel just tried to refinance the house using forged documents. I froze. What do you mean forged? He submitted a power of attorney in your name, with your signature. It's not real. I stopped it before it went through, but if the bank hadn't called me to verify, they might have approved a loan for $150,000. My mouth went dry. He tried to take a loan against my home. Yes, Arthur said. I checked further. They're drowning in debt. It's close to $200,000. Credit cards, failed investments, a car loan they stopped paying 6 months ago. Eleanor, they're desperate. I couldn't breathe. I leaned against the washing machine, gripping the cold metal just to stay upright. My son, the boy I raised alone after Harold died, had tried to forge my name. My son! Arthur's voice softened. We can press charges. It's fraud. We have every document. I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. No, I whispered. Not yet. Don't say anything, Eleanor. This is serious. You could lose. I said not yet, I snapped, louder than I intended. Then I took a breath. Please, Arthur, just give me time. I want to see how far they'll go. There was a pause. Then he said quietly, all right, but be careful. When I hung up, I could still hear the laughter from the dining room, the clinking glasses. The life going on downstairs as mine quietly crumbled. And something inside me, something that had once been soft and forgiving, turned to steel. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't speak to anyone. I went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. Through the thin walls, I could hear them talking. Their voices blurred together, but certain words cut through the air like knives. "I don't know why the bank rejected us," Clara hissed. "Those papers were perfect." Daniel sighed. "Someone must have gotten suspicious. We'll find another way. If we don't pay soon, they'll sue us," she said. "And your mother's just sitting in that huge house doing nothing? It's a waste of a prime asset. A waste. My home, the one Harold and I built from nothing, where I raised our son, where I buried my husband's ashes beneath the magnolia tree. A waste." "I know," Daniel said after a moment. "I'll figure it out." "Trust me." Their voices faded. But I lay awake, eyes open, my chest tight with something that wasn't just sadness anymore. It was fury. Cold, clear fury. That night, I didn't cry. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. Because I finally saw them for who they were. And more importantly, I remembered who I was. They thought they were playing chess against a frail, harmless woman. They had no idea I'd spent my entire life learning how to win without moving a single piece. The next morning, I made a decision. I didn't clean the mess from the party. I didn't cook breakfast. When Daniel came downstairs, still half asleep, he looked around the cluttered kitchen and frowned. "Mom, aren't you going to clean this up?" I looked him in the eye and said calmly, "No. It was Clara's party. She can clean it." The shock on his face was almost satisfying. He blinked. "Mom, that's not fair." "Oh, I think it's perfectly fair," I said, and I turned back to my coffee. He stared for a moment, then left without another word. And that's how it began, quietly. No shouting, no revenge plans, just silence. The kind of silence that makes guilty people nervous. They didn't know it yet, but the tides had already turned. I was done being their servant, and soon enough, they'd realize exactly who they were dealing with. Low hum of suspense music. Eleanor's tone softens. But the thing about revenge is it never starts with hate. It starts with love. Love that's been stepped on, used, and discarded until all that's left is the shell of someone who used to care. And when that shell finally cracks, there's no going back. They thought I'd given up. 4 days after that party, I barely spoke. I moved quietly through the house, polite, distant. To them, it must have looked like surrender. It's an old woman retreating into herself. It's a perfect scenario for people who wanted control. But they were wrong. I wasn't retreating. I was watching. And for the first time in years, I saw everything clearly. Clara spent her days lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, ordering takeout even though the fridge was full. Daniel buried himself in work or pretended to while ignoring the growing tension in the air. Whenever they passed me, they avoided eye contact. Guilt looks a lot like avoidance if you know what to look for. I started documenting everything. Not because I wanted proof, not yet, but because I needed to remind myself that I was into imagining it. Every insult. Every condescending tone. Every moment of disrespect. I wrote it all down in a little leather notebook Harold had given me years ago. "For your recipes," he'd said. I never thought I'd use it to record betrayal. The first entry read, "Clara told me to stop using cheap detergent because it ruins her clothes. She has not done laundry in over 6 months. The second, Daniel asked me for my bank card, said he'd pick up groceries. Never saw a receipt. Balance off by $142. The third, Clara made a joke at dinner that I'm practically staff. Daniel laughed, page after page. I filled that notebook until it became my private ledger of quiet indignities and my silent promise that they would not win. A week after the party, I went to see Arthur in person. His office was small but warm, shelves lined with books, a coffee pot always brewing. When I walked in, he looked up from his desk, relief and worry mixed on his face. "Eleanor," he said, "I've been expecting you." "I know," I replied. "You have the documents?" He nodded and slid a folder toward me. Inside were the forged papers Daniel had submitted to the bank. My name, my signature, the lies of my own flesh and blood. I could take this straight to the police, Arthur said. Solid evidence. I stared at the papers for a long time before speaking. Not yet. He frowned. Eleanor, why are you protecting him? I'm not, I said, my voice quiet. I'm educating him. He blinked. Educating. I leaned back in the chair, letting my words settle. My son forgot who raised him. He forgot what strength looks like. So, I'm going to remind him. But on my terms. Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples. You always were the calm storm type. Fine. What do you need from me? I slid him a small note I'd written on the drive over. 2 things. I want security cameras, discreet high quality, installed throughout the house. Kitchen, living room, office, garage. And I want you to freeze every joint account Daniel might have tried to access. He raised his eyebrows. Decisive. Arthur, I said softly, for 30 years I ran a kitchen that served more than just my family. You remember my catering business? He nodded. Of course. You built that from nothing. And then I expanded. I continued. Franchise kitchens, partnerships, investments, all under Hearthstone Culinary Group. His eyes widened. You mean that's yours? I smiled faintly. Yes, all of it. I sold most of my shares when Harold got sick, but the money was invested carefully. Daniel never knew how much. Assumed I was just comfortable, not wealthy. Arthur sat back. Then you could bury them, Eleanor. Legally, financially, I don't want to bury them. I interrupted. I want to teach them, but first I want the truth. In their own voices, the cameras were installed 3 days later, while Daniel and Clara were out shopping. A quiet technician from Arthur's office handled everything. Tiny black lenses hidden in corners, disguised as air fresheners and decorative fixtures. I felt a little like a spy in my own home, and strangely, for the first time in years, I felt alive. That night, I sat in my bedroom with the app open on my phone, watching the live feed as Daniel and Clara returned. They didn't even notice. Clara tossed her purse on the couch, kicking off her heels. I swear, I'm not cooking tonight, she groaned. Order Thai, Daniel grunted. Fine, but don't go overboard. We need to save, she scoffed. We're already drowning. Unless your mom suddenly decides to die and leave us the house, we're screwed. He didn't even flinch, just muttered, Don't talk like that. Oh, come on, she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. You've been saying you'd figure it out for months. Kay, I'm tired of living under her roof. She's suffocating me. Her roof, her house, her money keeping the lights on, and she was suffocating. Daniel sat down, rubbing his temples. Matt's been talking to someone. A guy who can help us redo the paperwork. My blood ran cold. Matt? His old college friend, a man who once borrowed $10,000 from me and never paid it back. Clara leaned forward. You mean? Forge it again? Daniel hesitated. Maybe not forge exactly, just make it look legitimate this time. She grinned. Then do it. Before the bank closes the door for good, I watched them laugh together, planning to steal from me. My son, my only child, and the woman he called his soulmate. I saved the footage. Every word, every smug smile. It wasn't just proof anymore. It was my weapon. Over the next few days, I collected more. Clara on the phone with her mother, complaining about me. She's always there. Walking around like she owns the place. Beatrice's voice crackling through the speaker. Well, technically, she does. But not for long. Daniel and Matt in the living room late one night. We'll need a notary from out of state, Matt whispered. Once it's signed, the sale will go through before she even knows. Daniel hesitated again. She's my mother, Matt. And then the answer that sealed his fate. That woman has controlled you your whole life. Take what's yours. Daniel's voice, steady, final. You're right. Let's do it. I remember closing the app after that. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I was calm. Completely calm, because now I had everything I needed. 2 nights later, Clara waltzed into the kitchen while I was reading at the table. She opened the fridge, frowning. Eleanor, we're low on groceries again. I didn't even look up. Then you'd better make a list. She blinked. Well, could you go tomorrow? I hate those big stores. I turned the page in my book. Then order online. She stared at me, surprised by my indifference. Are you all right? She asked, her voice carrying that fake concern that used to fool me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and smiled. Never better. She studied me for a moment, uneasy. "Kay," she muttered, closing the fridge. Weird. As she left, I watched her reflection in the dark window glass, confident, oblivious. She didn't know that every step she took in this house was now recorded, archived, waiting. I whispered to the empty room, "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." Pause, faint hum of suspense builds. Because revenge, you see, isn't about rage. It's about patience, about control, about waiting for the moment when the people who underestimated you finally realize what you've known all along. That they never should have mistaken kindness for weakness. The next morning, I called Arthur. "It's time," I said. "Time for what?" he asked. "For the truth," I replied. "And for their education." He chuckled softly, though there was admiration in his voice. "You really are something, Eleanor." "No," I said, gazing out the window at the magnolia tree Harold planted years ago. "I'm just done being nothing." Soft piano rises, fading to a quiet hum. "But what came next," I whisper, "was the night that changed everything. The night they finally learned who they were dealing with." I had never been one for dramatics. My late husband, Henry, used to say I was the calm in every storm. But that evening, as I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, buttoning my steel gray suit, I felt something else entirely, a storm within the calm. Not rage, not even sadness anymore, just precision, purpose. I slipped on my pearl earrings, the ones Henry gave me for our 10th anniversary, and fastened my watch. It ticked steadily, like a countdown. I looked at myself and realized I hadn't seen this woman in years. My spine straightened, my chin lifted. It's no longer the ghost haunting her own home. I was Eleanor Whitfield, the woman who once built a business from a single recipe card and a rented kitchen. And tonight, the world, or at least my son, was about to remember who I was. When I walked downstairs, Daniel was already waiting by the door. He looked up, startled. "Mom, you look different," he said. "Do I?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe I've finally remembered who I am." He blinked, confused, then shrugged. "Clara's waiting in the car." "Let's not be late, Dad." Robert, he hates it when people keep him waiting. Robert, he'd never been dad to Daniel. Not really. I let it go. This wasn't a night for old corrections. The drive to Robert's house was suffocating. Clara sat beside Daniel, tapping on her phone, smiling at something on the screen. I caught a glimpse, a message thread with her mother. "Everything ready for the big reveal tonight," Beatrice had written. "Almost," Clara had replied. "We'll make the announcement after dinner. Can't wait to have that house under our name." I turned my face toward the window, hiding the tremor in my hands. The moon outside was full, a perfect, indifferent witness. When we arrived, Robert's house gleamed with garish lights. Laughter spilled from the open door, mingling with the sound of clinking glasses. The smell of roasted lamb and expensive wine filled the air. I felt strangely detached, like I was walking into a play where everyone knew their lines but me. Beatrice met us at the door, her eyes sweeping over me from head to toe. "Oh, Eleanor, you clean up nicely. I hardly recognized you," she said with that syrupy smile that never reached her eyes. "Thank you," I said softly. I could say the same. She didn't catch the edge in my voice, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. We entered the dining room where the entire family was gathered. Robert sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a glass of red wine in hand, his gold watch glinting under the chandelier. His daughters, Chloe and Penelope, were already whispering to each other, their laughter sharp and cruel. I was seated, predictably, at the far end of the table. The invisible guest. Dinner began with polite small talk. Clara bragging about her design work. A lie. Robert boasting about his car dealership. Beatrice lamenting the price of imported olive oil, as though it were a personal tragedy. No one asked how I was. No one even looked at me. But I didn't mind. Let them ignore me. I had all the time in the world. After the main course, Robert stood up, tapping his spoon against his glass. "Family," he began, his voice booming with self-importance. "I have some wonderful news to share." He gestured toward Daniel and Clara. "These two have made a very wise, mature decision. They've decided to sell Eleanor's house." My heart thudded once hard, but my expression remained serene. Around the table, people clapped. Beatrice dabbed her eyes theatrically. "Oh, I'm so proud of them, taking charge of their future." Daniel smiled awkwardly. "We just think it's time Mom had less to worry about, you know? A condo closer to downtown, maybe something easier to manage." "Easier to manage?" I said quietly, my voice cutting through the chatter. I wasn't aware I'd asked for help managing anything. The table went silent. Every eye turned toward me. Daniel flushed. "Mom, we talked about this." "No," I interrupted gently. "You talked. I listened." Robert chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "'Kay? Now, Eleanor, don't be so touchy. It's for your own good. The house is too big for one person." I set my napkin on the table, folded neatly. "Robert," I said, "I appreciate your concern, but there's been a misunderstanding. The house is not for sale." Beatrice frowned. "Excuse me? It's mine." I continued, calm as the eye of a storm. "It's too, and it always will be." I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. "Arthur," I said softly. And right on cue, the doorbell rang. Every head turned as Arthur entered, my old friend and accountant, briefcase in hand, wearing that subtle smile of his that always meant trouble for someone else. "Good evening," he said politely. "I'm sorry to intrude, but Mrs. Whitfield asked me to deliver some documents." He placed a thick folder on the table and began laying out papers: property deeds, business registrations, financial statements. I looked at the sea of confused faces before me. "You see, while you've all been treating me like a burden, I've been building something of my own." I gestured to the documents. "These are the titles for 5 restaurants. Hearthstone Kitchen. Perhaps you've heard of them." Gasps rippled around the table. Beatrice's wineglass slipped from her hand and shattered. "Yes," I continued, my voice steady. "They're mine. All of them. As are 2 rental properties and several investment portfolios. My net worth is around $5 million. The silence that followed was delicious. I turned to Daniel. "And you, my son, you tried to steal from me." He paled. "Mom, that's not true." "It is true," I said quietly. "I have recordings. You and your friend plotting to forge a new power of attorney. Discussing how to sell my house before I'd even packed a box." Clara's lips trembled. You were spying on us." "I was protecting myself," I said. Something a woman learns after being betrayed by those she loves most. Robert cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Eleanor, this isn't the time or place." I turned on him. "You made it the time and place when you decided to toast to my humiliation." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel whispered, "Mom, I swear, I never meant." I held up a hand. "Don't. Not now. You'll have time to explain later, to a therapist, perhaps." Arthur began gathering the papers. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Whitfield," he said to Daniel. Then he nodded at me. "Shall we?" I rose slowly, pushing my chair back. My heart ached, but my spine stayed straight. "I'll be going now," I said softly. "Enjoy your meal." And just like that, I walked out. No shouting, no tears. Just the quiet, deliberate footsteps of a woman reclaiming her dignity. The night air outside was cold and clean. Arthur held the car door for me. "You handled that beautifully," he murmured. I smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for beauty. I did it for peace." As we drove away, the lights of Robert's house faded in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel helpless. I felt free. But peace, I would soon learn, comes at a cost. When I got home that night, the house felt different, not quieter. It had always been quiet since Henry died, but cleaner, lighter. The weight I'd carried for years, visible but crushing, had lifted in the span of an evening. I walked through the living room, still littered with signs of Clara's last party. The wine stains on my rug, the wilting flowers she'd arranged with designer flair. I looked at them and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just detachment. The kind that comes when you've finally stepped outside a cage you didn't realize you'd built yourself. I made myself tea chamomile with honey, Henry's old remedy for restless nights, and sat by the window. The moonlight spilled across the counter, silvering the edges of the old wooden spoon I'd held that morning, the one that had started it all. Funny how one sentence, "Get out of my kitchen," could unravel a decade of self-sacrifice. But maybe it hadn't unraveled anything. Maybe it had just exposed what was already broken. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't the sleeplessness of pain. It was clarity. Cold and sharp and almost comforting. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:30 a.m. I didn't have to check the caller ID to know who it was. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was small, hoarse. "Can we talk?" "I think we should," I said. "Come by at 10. Alone." When I opened the door 4 hours later, he stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed. He looked like a boy again. My boy. For a second, I felt my resolve waver. But then I remembered the forged documents, the laughter at that dinner table, the years of silence as they slowly erased me from my own home. "Come in," I said. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once taught him how to mix pancake batter, his tiny hands sticky with flour. Now, those same hands were shaking for a very different reason. "Mom, I don't know what to say," he began. "I messed up badly. I thought I could fix everything before it got to this point." "You mean before you got caught?" I said softly. He winced. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. Clara and we were drowning, Mom. The bills, the debts, we didn't see another way." I leaned back in my chair. "So you thought stealing from me was the way out?" He shook his head violently. "It wasn't stealing, it was borrowing, sort of." "I plan to pay you back." I laughed, not cruelly, just hollowly. "Daniel, when you forge your mother's signature, it's not a loan. It's a betrayal." He put his head in his hands. I know. His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." The silence that followed was long and painful. I wanted to believe him, wanted to reach across the table and pull him into my arms like I used to when he scraped his knee. But love doesn't erase truth, and truth doesn't vanish just because it hurts. "Danielle," I said finally, "you're my son. Nothing will ever change that. But what you and Clara did. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "What's going to happen now?" I'd rehearsed this part in my mind all night. "You'll move out. Both of you." Within 2 weeks, he stared at me as if he hadn't heard right. "Move out." "Mom, where will we?" "You'll figure it out," I said gently. "You're an adult. You have a job. Clara can work too. You'll manage." He swallowed hard. "Clara won't like that." I smiled faintly. "Clara doesn't have to like anything. Not anymore." He stared at me for a long time, searching for the mother who would bend, who would soothe. But she wasn't there. "Not today. Will you press charges?" He whispered, "No." His head jerked up. "You won't?" "No." I repeated, "Not this time. But I have conditions." I slid an envelope across the table. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a typed list. Simple, firm, final. "You and Clara will attend therapy separately and together. You will move out within 2 weeks. I will pay your debts directly to the creditors, not to you. You will have no access to my finances or property moving forward. You will rebuild trust through action, not apology." His hands trembled as he read. "You'd still help me after everything." "I'm your mother," I said quietly. "I won't let you drown. But I also won't let you drag me under with you." He broke down then, full, body-shaking sobs. And I just sat there, sipping my tea, watching the storm I hadn't caused finally break over him. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was release. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about peace. When he finally left, I stood in the doorway, watching him drive away. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to call out after him. He needed to face himself before he could face me again. The days that followed were oddly quiet. Clara avoided me completely, tiptoeing around the house, her eyes full of venom and fear. She stopped cooking, stopped talking, stopped pretending. I suppose humiliation silenced her more effectively than any argument ever could. A week later, I came home from errands to find a note on the counter. "We're leaving early. Please don't contact us. No apology, no goodbye. Just a final, graceless exit." I sat down staring at the paper. Then I smiled. Not out of malice, but relief. Let them go. Let them find out who they are when no one's there to clean up after them. That night, I wandered through the house. For the first time in years, every room belonged to me again. My kitchen gleamed. My photographs smiled down at me from the walls, Henry's gentle face. Daniel as a boy, my sister Marguerite at her wedding. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. The neighborhood was quiet, the air crisp with autumn. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed. Life was still moving, and for the first time I was moving with it, not against it. But peace is never permanent. It's earned and guarded, moment by moment. 2 weeks later, Daniel called again. His voice was steadier, humbler. "Mom, we found a small apartment. It's nothing fancy, but it's ours." "I'm glad," I said. "How's Clara?" He hesitated. "She's working at the restaurant, the hostess position." I asked, remembering the offer Arthur had arranged. "Yeah," he said. "She didn't want to at first. Said it was beneath her, but after what happened, she's trying. We both are." There was silence. Then his voice softened. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on us. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Then earn it," I said simply. When the call ended, I sat for a long time in the quiet. My heart still hurt. It probably always would, but there was a strange comfort in knowing that pain could coexist with strength, that love could survive betrayal even if trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick. As I blew out the candle on the table, I whispered into the darkness, "We'll see. Henry, we'll see if our boy can find his way back." And for the first time in a long, long time, I hoped he would. The weeks after Daniel and Clara moved out were some of the strangest of my life. Not because of loneliness. I'd been lonely for years, long before they packed their bags, but because of space. So much silence, so much room to breathe. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. I'd wake at 6, out of habit. Shuffle into the kitchen, expecting to see Clara's half-finished smoothie cups on the counter, Daniel's work bag dumped by the door. But there was nothing, just sunlight spilling across the clean floor and the hum of the refrigerator. Freedom can be disorienting when you've lived in captivity for too long. I started small, rearranged the living room furniture the way I liked it, not the way Clara had insisted looked modern. I opened the curtains and let light pour in. I even pulled my old record player from the attic. It's the one Henry and I used to dance to when we were young and foolish and thought love could fix anything. When the first notes of Billie Holiday filled the house, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I felt alive again. It had been years since my own home sounded like me. In the following days, I rediscovered the quiet joy of being self-contained. I cooked for one, and it was enough. I walked to the park, fed the ducks, chatted with the florist who still remembered Henry's favorite blooms. I visited my sister Marguerite for tea. She looked at me and said, "You look lighter, Ellie?" And for once, I didn't brush it off. "I think I am," I told her. Still, there were moments when the ache returned. Late at night, when the house settled and the old pipes groaned, I'd think of Daniel, wonder where he was. Whether he hated me for what I'd done, or worse, hated himself. Arthur stopped by every week or so, bringing paperwork and updates. "Your accounts are secure," he'd assure me, spreading files across the table. "Investments are stable. You could retire twice over if you wanted." I'd smile. "Think I already have, Arthur. But maybe not from life." He chuckled. "I like this version of you, Eleanor. The one who knows her worth." "So do I," I said quietly. 3 weeks after they left, I walked into one of my restaurants for the first time in years. Hearthstone Kitchen, the downtown location, with its soft lighting and warm oak interiors. I'd named it after Henry's favorite saying, "The hearth is where the heart learns to rest." The staff greeted me like royalty, though most of them had no idea who I was. I liked that anonymity, the quiet power of being the unseen owner. And there, by the hostess stand, stood Clara. She wore the uniform, crisp white blouse, black skirt, hair tied neatly back. She didn't see me at first. She was greeting a couple with a polite smile, her voice steady, practiced. There was no arrogance now, no condescension, just effort. When the guests were seated, I stepped forward. Her eyes widened. "Mrs. Whitfield, Eleanor?" She looked like she might faint. "I didn't know you were coming." "That's because I didn't announce it," I said, smiling faintly. "I was in the neighborhood." She twisted her hands. "If you're here to check on me, I promise I'm doing my best." "I know I don't deserve this job, but Clara," I interrupted gently, "you don't need to perform for me. Just do your job well. That's all anyone expects." Her lip trembled. "I'm trying. I can see that." I paused. "You're doing fine." The relief that crossed her face was almost painful to watch. For the first time, I saw not the polished, entitled woman who'd invaded my kitchen, but someone smaller, frightened, desperate to be seen as more than her mistakes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Truly." I nodded, then turned toward the dining area. Before I walked away, I added, "Clara, there's dignity in starting over. Don't waste it." She blinked, then nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't." That evening, I sat in a corner booth with a glass of wine and my thoughts. Watching the staff move with quiet efficiency, hearing the soft clatter of dishes, the low murmur of conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, not in revenge, not in wealth, but in what I built with my own two hands. My life had roots deeper than any betrayal. 2 weeks later, Daniel called. His voice was different, steadier, clearer. "Mom, can I come by this weekend?" "Of course," I said. Sunday after lunch. When he arrived, I barely recognized him. He looked healthier, thinner, yes, but in a way that spoke of effort, not neglect. His clothes were simple, his eyes sober. "Clara says hi," he began awkwardly. "Does she?" I smiled. "I saw her last week. She's working hard." He nodded. "Yeah, she actually likes it. Says it's the first time she's felt useful." There was a pause, then he looked down. "Mom, I wanted to say thank you for helping us, for not destroying us." I studied his face, the same one I'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times as a child. "If I didn't do it for you, Daniel, I did it for me. I needed to stop being a victim in my own story." He nodded slowly. "I get that now." We sat on the porch watching the late afternoon light fade through the trees. For a while, we just listened to the cicadas. "Mom," he said finally, "I started therapy. Real therapy. It's not just the ones you made us promise. My counselor says I've been living in guilt my whole life. It's first for Dad's death, then for not being enough for everyone." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw not a betrayer, but a broken man trying to rebuild. "You were always enough," I said softly. "You just forgot who you were, same as I did." He smiled, small and weary. Maybe we're both remembering now. When he left that evening, I watched his car disappear down the street, a faint warmth blooming in my chest. Forgiveness wasn't a door you opened once. It was a garden you tended slowly, carefully, pulling weeds of resentment one by one. As the days turned to weeks, I filled my life with purpose again. I started volunteering at a community kitchen twice a week, teaching cooking classes for single mothers, sharing recipes, laughter, stories. They called me Miss Eleanor, and I called them dear. Every night I came home exhausted, flour-dusted, and happier than I'd been in years. Sometimes when I closed up after class, I'd find Clara waiting outside, timid, clutching her coat. "Do you need a ride home, Mrs. Whitfield?" she'd ask. And sometimes I'd say yes. We'd drive in silence to women linked by regret and something like hope. I never told her I'd started to see her differently, that beneath her pride had been a child crying out for belonging. That maybe, in some quiet corner of my heart, I was learning to forgive her too. But forgiveness, like bread, needs time to rise, and I was in no rush. Life had become simpler, steadier. I'd reclaimed my kitchen, my peace, my identity. And for the first time in a long while, I realized the story wasn't over. It was only changing hands. They moved out in silence. No shouting, no tears. Just the low thrum of boxes being carried out of my hallway and the echo of footsteps that didn't belong anymore. The day they left, the house was still. Too still. I stood in the doorway after their car pulled away, the gravel crunching beneath their tires fading into the distance. When the sound was gone, I realized something strange. I wasn't sad. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be noticed, thanked, or included. I was simply me, standing in the house I had built, surrounded by quiet that didn't hurt. For weeks after they left, I lived like a ghost who'd reclaimed her body. I woke early, brewed my coffee without hearing Clara's footsteps behind me. The smell of toast didn't mix with her perfume anymore. The kitchen, the one she had turned into her stage, was mine again. Felt sacred, like walking into a chapel after a war had ended. I touched the wooden spoon she had mocked me for using, the one my husband carved for me when Daniel was a baby. It fit perfectly in my hand, worn smooth by decades of love and labor. I stirred my soup that morning and said aloud, "We're home again." Sometimes I think the walls heard me. But peace is not the same as healing. Healing is harder. It creeps in small steps, like ivy reclaiming a wall. A week after they moved out, Arthur stopped by. He placed a folder on my dining table: documents, receipts, new account balances. "You're in a strong position now," he said. I smiled. "I'm not sure I ever wasn't. I just forgot it." He nodded. "You did the right thing, Eleanor. You didn't destroy them, you made them face themselves." "I didn't do it for revenge," I said quietly. "I did it to stop being erased." He hesitated at the door. "Do you think they'll change?" "I don't know," I answered, "but I know I have." In the weeks that followed, I poured my energy into the restaurants. For years, I had let others handle the operations while I stayed in the background, content to be unseen. Now, I visited every location myself. The young chefs looked at me with surprise, this gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and steady hands. I walked the kitchens, adjusting sauces, tasting soups, reminding them what Hearthstone stood for. "Comfort isn't a flavor," I told them. "It's a memory. Every dish you make should remind someone that they're still loved." I became something. I hadn't been in decades a leader, and to my surprise, I loved it. At night, I'd return home to my quiet house. Sometimes I'd stand by the window, cup of tea in hand, and wonder if Daniel and Clara were eating well. I didn't text, though I sometimes wanted to. Let distance do its work, I told myself. Love doesn't need to be smothered to survive, it just needs air to breathe. 2 months passed before I heard from Daniel again. It was a short message. "Mom, can we visit? We'd like to talk." My first instinct was suspicion. The wounds were still fresh, but something in his wording, "we'd like to talk," felt different. Not demand, not guilt, just request. That Saturday, they arrived. The car pulled up the same way it had the day they left, but there was no arrogance in their movements now. Daniel carried a small potted plant. Clara held a box wrapped in plain paper. When I opened the door, the air between us was fragile. "Hi, Mom," Daniel said softly. "Hello, Daniel." I turned to Clara. "Clara," she nodded, eyes lowered. "Mrs. Hayes." Then she caught herself. I stepped aside. "Come in." They stood in the living room like strangers visiting a museum. Daniel cleared his throat. "We brought you something." Clara opened the box. Inside was a restored recipe book, my old, worn notebook of handwritten recipes that she had once called outdated. The pages had been rebound, the stains preserved under clear, protective sheets. I traced my fingers over the cover. "You fixed this." Clara nodded. "We found it in the attic when we were packing. I read some of it. You wrote about your husband in the margins, about Daniel's favorite soups." I didn't realize how much love was in these pages. Her voice broke on the last word. For the first time, I saw not the entitled young woman who had invaded my home, but a human being ashamed, small, trying. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," she said. "For everything. For treating you like you didn't matter. You did. You do." Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, there's no excuse for what I did. For what I almost did. You trusted me, and I tried to take what was yours. You have every right to hate me." I looked at him, my boy, who had once brought me dandelions in jam jars, who had once cried when he broke my favorite teacup because he thought I'd stop loving him. Hate him? No, I could never hate him. "I don't hate you," I said quietly, "but I can't forget what happened." Forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing not to let it define us forever. He nodded, tears forming. "Then maybe we can start again." Slowly, I gave a small smile. Slowly is the only way things worth keeping grow. After they left, I sat with the restored recipe book in my lap. Between the pages, I found a note in Daniel's handwriting. "Mom, we've started therapy. Clara's working full-time now. I'm paying back every debt myself. Thank you for giving us the chance to be better people, even when we didn't deserve it. We're not who we were anymore. Love, D." I read it twice, then closed the book. The ache in my chest softened. I walked into the kitchen, opened the window, and let the late summer air drift in. The evening light fell across the countertops, the same ones that had seen laughter, cruelty, and redemption. Sometimes I still hear echoes of that day, Clara's sharp voice, Daniel's mocking clap, but now they don't sting. They remind me of who I was and who I refuse to remain. People think revenge is about destruction. It's not. True revenge, the kind that lasts, is about reclamation. Reclaiming your dignity, your peace, your sense of self. That night, I cooked a stew from my recipe book, the one labeled Daniel's favorite. Age 10, I filled 2 containers and left them by the front door with a note, "For when you need comfort. Love, Mom." I didn't wait for thanks. Some love doesn't need an audience. But as I sat down to eat my portion, I realized something profound. I hadn't just survived them. I had survived me, the woman who believed silence was love, who thought endurance was virtue. Now, my silence had power. It wasn't fear, was peace. When people ask me what justice feels like, I tell them, it feels like standing in your own kitchen, stirring your own pot, and realizing you were never the servant in your own story. You were the author all along. They say time softens all things. I'm not sure that's true. Time doesn't soften pen, it teaches you how to live around it. It turns the sharp edges into something you can hold without bleeding every time. Months passed after that day they came to visit. Seasons changed. The trees in my yard shedding their leaves and dressing themselves again. Life moved, as it always does, quietly, persistently. I found new rhythms. Morning walks, lunches with Arthur, evenings spent experimenting with recipes I had once abandoned. I taught myself how to bake sourdough, something my husband used to love, but I had stopped making after he died. Now the smell of it filled the house again, golden and warm. Sometimes I'd pause in the middle of kneading and realize that for the first time in years, I was living for me. Not as a mother, not as a widow, not as a caretaker, just Eleanor. And she wasn't so bad to live with. Daniel and Clara kept their word. Therapy became their anchor. I could hear it in Daniel's voice when he called every Sunday. There was a steadiness, a kind of humility that had never been there before. "Mom," he said one evening, "we're happier now. Not perfect, but honest. Honest." That word meant more to me than any apology. Clara was working at one of my restaurants still, but she'd earned a promotion, assistant manager. "Arthur sent me updates sometimes. She's good with people," he told me. Firm but kind. Funny, I thought. The woman who once barked at me to get out of my own kitchen was now learning how to lead with grace in mine. Life has a peculiar sense of symmetry. I'd see them sometimes at family gatherings or when they came by to help with errands. The awkwardness faded slowly, replaced by something fragile but real. Effort. Clara would bring flowers, always lilies, and Daniel would fix the small things around the house without me asking. Once, as we shared tea, Clara said, "I know we can't undo what we did, but I'm trying to be someone you'd be proud to know." I didn't answer right away. I looked at her face, the same one that had once carried only entitlement and disdained on, saw a woman learning humility the hard way. "I don't need perfection, Clara," I said softly, "just sincerity. And I see it now." She smiled then, and it wasn't the sharp, polished smile she used to wear. It was small, human, but here's the thing about survival. Once you reclaim your life, you start to see the world differently. I began volunteering at a community center, teaching cooking classes for single parents and widows like me. Women who had been dismissed, used, forgotten. They came with their own stories, quiet, bruised, unfinished. One evening, after class, a woman lingered behind. She was maybe 40, eyes tired, hands rough from work. "My son. He treats me like a burden," she said. "He says I should be grateful he lets me live with him." I saw in her the woman I used to be, small, apologetic, waiting for someone else's approval to breathe. I took her hands in mine and said, "Then stop waiting. Respect yourself first." "Love won't survive where there's no respect," she cried. Then she smiled. And I thought maybe that's the only real revenge worth having, to turn your pain into something that saves someone else. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the attic when I found an old photo of Daniel as a boy. He was sitting on the kitchen counter, face smeared with chocolate, holding that same wooden spoon. I remembered that day. I had baked him his favorite cake. He had insisted on helping, even though he'd made a mess of everything. But I hadn't cared. We'd laughed until our stomachs hurt. I sat on the attic floor and wept, not out of grief, but gratitude. For all that had been broken, there was still love. Not the kind that forgets, but the kind that forgives in silence. I framed the photo and placed it on the kitchen shelf beside my husband's picture. My two boys, one gone, one redeemed. Both loved in their own ways. Sometimes I still hear echoes from that day, Clara's cold command, Daniel's cruel applause. But when I do, I also hear something else, the sound of my own voice, steady and clear, saying, "No more." That was the moment I came back to life. Not the dinner, not the revelation, that moment. The moment I realized that even at 63, I could still choose myself. People think strength is loud, but they're wrong. True strength is quiet. It's the calm that comes after the storm, when you're standing amid the ruins and realizing you're still here. Daniel often asks if I've forgiven him completely. I tell him the truth. Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once, son. It's a hallway you keep walking, one step at a time. He understands now. Sometimes he'll stop by after work just to sit with me. We don't always talk. Sometimes we just share a meal, and the silence between us feels peaceful, not heavy. Last week he said, "Mom, I want you to know I'm proud of you. You didn't just save us. You saved yourself." That made me smile. Because once upon a time, I would have brushed off those words, told him it was nothing, but not anymore. Now, I know what it took to get here. Funny, the kitchen is quiet again, but it's not empty. Every sound feels richer. The simmering of soup, the gentle scrape of the spoon. It's the wind outside brushing the curtains. This house no longer feels haunted by what happened. It feels alive. Not with noise, but with peace. When people hear my story, they call it revenge. But I don't think it was revenge. Not really. It was justice. Justice not in the court's sense, but in the soul's. The kind that restores what was taken: your dignity, your voice, your name. I didn't need to destroy them to find peace. I only needed to stop destroying myself for their comfort. And that, I think, is what I want anyone listening to remember. You don't owe your silence to those who mistreat you. You don't owe your forgiveness before you've healed. You don't owe your kindness to those who confuse it for weakness. All you owe is to yourself, to stand tall, to reclaim your space, to whisper when no one else will listen, "I matter." When I stand in my kitchen now, I sometimes talk to my husband's photo. I tell him, "You'd laugh if you saw what happened here. You'd say, Ellie, you always were too gentle until someone pushed too far." Maybe he's right, but maybe that's the beauty of it. Even gentleness, when pushed to its edge, becomes strength. So here I am, 64 years old, a survivor, a businesswoman. I, a woman who was told to get out of her own kitchen and who decided instead to take her whole life back. And if there's one thing I've learned from it all, it's this. You can lose everything: respect, love, family, and still find yourself again. And once you do, once you truly remember who you are, no one can ever take that from you again.